The entire structure at Windsor Castle basically falls apart over a single word. And the word that started it all was grandmother. Princess Charlotte, who was only 9 years old, sits down at what was supposed to be a completely ordinary private family lunch. Within minutes, she delivers a sentence so calmly devastating that nobody in the room knows how to recover. The king is sitting right there. Prince William and Catherine are present with all 3 children. Camilla has been keeping the conversation deliberately light because she knows recent household tensions have made even private meals feel sensitive, and for a while, everyone plays their part. Then Camilla casually describes herself as belonging to the children's grandparent generation. Charlotte looks up from her plate and answers with surgical calm. She states that she already knows who her grandmothers are, and she will not call Camilla grandmother. The room does not erupt in anger. It goes terrifyingly quiet. Nobody gasps, nobody scrambles to fix the moment, and nobody jumps in with a quick distraction. The silence just stretches out across the table. In that quiet, everyone present understands what just happened. Charlotte made a deliberate choice, and Camilla knew it immediately. Now watch this, because before we dive deep into how this single moment sent shockwaves through the entire monarchy, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe to Prime Royal Central so you never miss an insider update on the stories shaping the crown. Alright, let's unpack what happened the moment that silence settled over the dining room. King Charles hears his granddaughter say this, and his immediate instinct as both a grandfather and a reigning monarch is to ask why she said it. His voice stays low, but the question carries immense weight because he is the king, and he is likely expecting an embarrassed childlike apology or a simple explanation that can be smoothed over. That is not what he gets. Charlotte answers that some family names have to be earned by how people make you feel. That is a 9-year-old child stating a firm principle without coaching, without rehearsal, and without throwing a tantrum. She then politely asks if she can leave the table. Catherine nods in agreement. Charlotte pushes her chair back, and the scrape of wood against the floor is louder than anything spoken that entire afternoon. Camilla remains completely frozen. Charles stares across at William, suddenly aware that no royal command or palace protocol can undo what just transpired. William is not angry at his daughter. He watches her carefully instead of correcting her, which reveals everything about where this boundary originated. Catherine follows Charlotte into the corridor, and that is where the real story begins to surface. Okay, stay with me, because this was not the first time Camilla had made the young princess feel uncomfortable. Weeks earlier, a private encounter occurred that changed everything, and Charlotte had been carrying the weight of it in total silence. The palace could easily survive one uncomfortable sentence at a family lunch. But what Charlotte tells her mother behind that closed door transforms a minor family embarrassment into the direct consequence of something that had been building for months. For Charlotte, the issue was never truly about a royal title. For Camilla, that is precisely why it cut so deep. Catherine sits beside her daughter after the meal and refrains from starting with discipline. Instead, she asks what the word grandmother actually means to her. The answer comes slowly from the young princess: trust, safety, shared stories, and someone who makes you feel protected rather than pressured. Charlotte has grown up surrounded by formal titles, where words like queen and heir shape both public duties and private identity. But to a child, family terms carry a far different weight. Catherine understands that distinction immediately and refuses to force her daughter's genuine feelings into a rehearsed performance. Meanwhile, Camilla is sitting in another room, feeling the wound from a completely different perspective. She confides in Charles that she can tolerate hostile media headlines and decades of public comparisons, but she cannot pretend that a direct emotional rejection from his granddaughter means nothing. The king attempts to offer reassurance, but he pauses before claiming Charlotte will eventually come around. That brief hesitation cuts deeper than he intended. Camilla has spent years seeking genuine acceptance inside his inner circle, and the younger generation represents a level of private belonging that formal ceremonies can never guarantee. Later that afternoon, William finds Catherine and asks the one question both of them had been holding back. He asks if Charlotte mentioned Diana. Catherine confirms that their daughter has become increasingly curious about the grandmother she never had the chance to meet, especially after looking at private family photographs and listening to personal memories shared by her father. Catherine then adds a far more troubling detail. Charlotte is not rejecting Camilla because Diana has been built up as an idealized figure in her mind. During their quiet conversation after lunch, the princess described an exchange from weeks prior where she felt Camilla dismissed something emotionally vital to her. William pauses outside Charlotte's bedroom before stepping inside. His hand reaches for the door handle, hesitates, and falls away. The future king realizes that surface-level royal harmony is no longer the main issue. His daughter has been pulled into an adult history she did not create, and he must choose whether to speak as a prince protecting institutional order or as a father protecting trust. When William finally enters the room, Charlotte explains that everything changed during an informal gathering weeks before the Windsor lunch. There had been no raised voices, no dramatic exit, and no formal confrontation. There was only a quiet room, a photograph of Diana, and one sentence that Charlotte carried away with her. The adults present forgot the brief exchange almost immediately, but Charlotte did not. What Camilla viewed as a harmless correction settled heavily in the young princess's mind, because it touched the one family relationship she can only know through stories, making those memories feel as though they needed active defending. To understand how that moment unfolded, look at what happened during those quiet afternoons prior to the luncheon. Charlotte had spent time with William asking about old family albums and the history behind them. Catherine actively encouraged those conversations because she wanted all three of her children to understand their human history as a family before they had to understand it as a constitutional monarchy. A private heritage presentation at Windsor had been arranged as an informal gathering, where photographs and personal items from previous generations were brought out away from public cameras. William kept his descriptions of Diana simple and personal. He described her warmth, spoke about her role as a mother, and never used her memory as a weapon against anyone alive. Charlotte paused at one specific photograph and quietly referred to her as Grandmother Diana. Camilla walked into the room during that exact exchange and heard the title used. She hesitated, then told the young princess that she should not become overly attached to people she never knew when she had living family right around her. While the sentence was delivered calmly, its impact was immediate. Charlotte looked down, closed the small photo album she had been examining, and asked her father if they could continue the conversation another day. William noticed the sudden shift instantly. Later on, the prince mentioned to Camilla that his daughter was old enough to register subtle tones, but far too young to carry the emotional weight of decades of family conflicts. The queen consort maintained that she only wanted Charlotte grounded in the present. However, Catherine eventually discovered that a second moment had occurred that no one else witnessed. Charlotte had left the room following the photo album exchange, but returned moments later to retrieve a bracelet she had left on a table. Before stepping back into the room, she overheard Camilla telling an aide that constant references to Diana could become confusing for the children as they grow up. The aide said very little in response, but Charlotte heard every word clearly. To her 9-year-old mind, the implication was unmistakable. Remembering her late grandmother was being treated as a problem that adults needed to manage. Charlotte kept that hurt entirely to herself for weeks. She never confronted Camilla, never voiced a complaint, and never told her parents what she had overheard. Instead, she arrived at a private conclusion. If accepting one adult meant diluting the memory of another, she would refuse to use the requested family name entirely. As William sits in his daughter's room listening to her explain the forgotten bracelet moment, he lowers his eyes and places the photograph he is holding face down on the desk. The scene at the Windsor luncheon was not an act of sudden misbehavior or childlike disobedience. It was the calculated end result of a decision a 9-year-old girl had been carrying in silence. By that evening, the central issue was no longer whether Charlotte had violated royal etiquette. William wanted to know why his daughter had been placed in a position where defending her late grandmother felt necessary in her own home, and Camilla was about to face that question directly. William does not call for palace advisors or arrange a formal household meeting. He asks Camilla to speak with him privately, waits until the door is completely closed, and informs her that there will be no broader discussion regarding Charlotte until they address the root cause of the issue first. Camilla arrives expecting a conversation about repairing the embarrassment from the luncheon. Instead, she finds a father convinced that his daughter was forced to carry an unfair emotional burden created by adults, and he refuses to let royal hierarchy sweep it under the rug. Notice how William structures this meeting. He deliberately keeps King Charles out of the room. The king's presence would instantly frame the dispute around royal rank and official precedence, which is precisely what William refuses to allow. This is not a discussion about who outranks a 9-year-old princess within the royal institution. It is a firm stance on who holds the authority to guide her personal feelings. Camilla anticipates a demand for an apology regarding the awkwardness at the dining table. Instead, William clearly lays out the exact sequence of events: the photograph, the forgotten bracelet, and the second remark his daughter overheard in the doorway. William stands firm, placing both hands on the back of a chair without sitting down. Camilla remains seated as he asks the question she was not prepared to answer. He asks directly if she told an aide that remembering his mother was confusing for the children. The queen consort answers carefully, stating that the remark was never intended for Charlotte to hear. William's expression hardens. He replies directly that bad intentions are not required to cause real damage. His voice remains controlled as he explains what those words produced. Charlotte now believes that forming an emotional bond with Camilla would be an act of disloyalty to Diana's memory. At this point, Camilla's composure breaks. She explains to William that she has spent decades being judged against a public figure who passed away long before the current family dynamic was established. She admits that every constant reference to Diana can feel as though no emotional space is left for anyone else in the household. She acknowledges that her reaction stemmed from a fear that Charlotte's growing fascination with those past stories would turn into yet another personal comparison she could never win. William listens quietly, but he does not pull back. He tells her clearly that his daughter was never asking her to compete with a memory. He then sets an absolute boundary, stating that while no one will encourage hostility or forbid Charlotte from being respectful, no one in the palace will order the young princess to use an intimate family term she does not feel in her heart. Camilla asks directly whether that boundary represents his personal opinion or a new structural rule for the household. William's response is immediate and absolute. He states that when it comes to his children, he and Catherine make the decisions. Camilla falls completely silent as the gravity of that statement sets in. The initial frustration shifts into deep discomfort because she realizes the operational reality of that boundary. King Charles may hold the crown, but attempting to force his granddaughter to display fake affection would make royal authority appear overbearing rather than strong. Within the hour, the king is informed of what was said during that closed-door meeting, and he requests to speak with his son alone. Camilla had hoped the king's structural authority would intervene to restore standard order. But Charles now faces a dilemma that no title can easily resolve, choosing between protecting his wife's standing or respecting his son's right to protect his child's emotional boundaries. Charles has spent a lifetime navigating an institution governed by titles, protocol, and strict obligation. Yet this specific rift cannot be managed by traditional palace procedures. The king can dictate public positioning, determine ceremonial appearances, and enforce how staff formally address the queen. What he cannot do without severe internal damage is command his granddaughter to feel a personal connection that does not exist. William is fully aware of this reality before stepping into his father's private office. Charles meets with his son completely alone, choosing not to include private secretaries or personal aides, so there is no formal record of internal hesitation surrounding a deeply personal family matter. The king opens the conversation by framing the conflict as a major threat to overall family unity rather than a direct challenge to official rank. He points out that public protocol requires a unified front. William responds calmly, reassuring his father that Charlotte will strictly adhere to all standard rules of royal decorum whenever required. She will be polite, respectful, and follow official etiquette in public without fail. However, the word grandmother belongs strictly to private personal affection, not constitutional duty. Charles acknowledges that Charlotte's firm refusal at the lunch table wounded Camilla far more deeply than she has expressed publicly or privately. William does not dismiss that reality, but his response is instant and unwavering. He reminds the king that his 9-year-old daughter was wounded first. That brings us to the end of this first chapter in this unfolding palace saga. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Prime Royal Central. The confrontation between Prince William and King Charles reached a point where the entire future of how the royal family manages its private life was hanging in the balance. The prince made it abundantly clear that his 9-year-old daughter was far too young to navigate decades of complex royal tension. More importantly, she was completely powerless when an adult made her feel that remembering her late grandmother, Princess Diana, was somehow disloyal. William insists to the king that forcing Charlotte to apologize or correct her statement now would teach her the absolute wrong lesson, that the most powerful person in the room gets to dictate everyone else's private emotions. Charles feels the pressure mounting around him from every angle. On one side, he deeply loves his wife and knows how hard she has fought over the decades to feel secure within the royal fold. On the other side, he looks at his granddaughter and realizes that whatever happens next will stay with her for the rest of her life. The monarch looks at William and directly asks whether Catherine truly supports his uncompromising stance. William answers without a single second of hesitation, yes, she does. Together, they have drawn a line in the sand. When public protocol requires it, Charlotte will address Camilla using her proper royal style and official title. But in private, she will never, under any circumstances, be commanded to call her grandmother. Furthermore, Prince George and Prince Louis will be given the exact same freedom to allow their personal relationships to evolve naturally without palace pressure. Now, watch this, because Charles slowly removes his glasses and sets them quietly beside a closed folder on his desk. A heavy silence stretches between the king and the future king. Finally, Charles speaks the words that settle the issue. He declares that he will not compel Charlotte. That single statement carries massive institutional consequences. The formal royal structure remains entirely under the king's sovereign authority, yet William and Catherine have successfully asserted complete control over their children's emotional upbringing. It proves that even a reigning monarch cannot command trust without threatening the very family unit he is attempting to protect. So Charles naturally believes that this tense compromise can remain quietly behind the closed doors of Windsor Castle. But okay, stay with me, because that belief does not survive the week. The moment Camilla learns that Charles has refused to overrule William, her behavior shifts noticeably. Palace staff quickly begin noticing her absence from informal family gatherings that she would normally never miss. The king chose not to force his granddaughter's affection, but that decision did not bring instant peace. Instead, it created an immediate emotional distance, and Camilla's sudden withdrawal made that rift visible almost overnight. The first real consequence is not an official palace statement or a press leak. It is a stark, empty chair. Camilla quietly decides to skip a private family tea where Charlotte is expected to attend. She tells Charles directly that she sees no point in setting up another uncomfortable encounter. What appears on the surface to be personal restraint feels far more calculated and serious inside the family circle. Catherine immediately worries that Charlotte will start blaming herself for the queen consort's absence. William suspects the sudden withdrawal is actually a subtle form of emotional pressure, while Charles is forced to watch his wife retreat from the very inner circle she spent decades trying to join. Camilla continues to carry out every single formal public duty required of her position, without fail. However, private family invitations become a completely different story. Household staff begin noting a distinct pattern. King Charles continues to attend informal gatherings with his grandchildren, while Camilla hesitates and routinely declines whenever Charlotte is scheduled to be present. Because these are private family events, rather than official public engagements, attendance is entirely optional. That difference is critical, because every time Camilla stays away, her empty seat feels intentional. She convinces herself that she is simply preventing another public or private showdown. Yet, in doing so, her pattern of absence creates the exact visible gap inside the royal household that she was trying to avoid. Catherine spots the psychological danger almost immediately. Charlotte notices the empty place sitting at the tea table and directly asks her mother if Camilla stayed away because of her. Catherine sits her down and delivers a firm, grounding truth. She explains that adults are entirely responsible for their own choices and their own feelings. She tells Charlotte that a 9-year-old child does not have to fix or repair the adults around her, simply because she chose to speak with honest clarity. The young princess looks visibly relieved, but that relief is short-lived. She looks up and asks if the queen is angry with her. Catherine explains that feeling hurt and feeling angry are not the same thing, leaving Charlotte quiet as she processes the distinction. Meanwhile, Camilla sits alone elsewhere in the palace, expressing her frustration to Charles. She tells him that she feels degraded, reduced to someone who has to check whether his grandchildren are comfortable before she can even walk into a room in her own residence. The king listens to her distress, but this time, he does not simply validate her pain. He looks at his wife and tells her plainly that staying away will never build trust with Charlotte. Retreating into isolation might protect Camilla from another awkward interaction, but it places the emotional weight of the rift right back onto the child. For the first time, Charles tells Camilla that repairing this relationship must begin without demanding or expecting the word grandmother. It is at this point that William learns Camilla is considering skipping an upcoming private birthday gathering for the family. His concern turns into sharp focus. He realizes that if Camilla's pattern of absence follows Charlotte from room to room, his daughter might grow up believing she holds the power to make adults appear or disappear at will. As he tells Catherine that is precisely the unfair psychological burden they were trying to shield her from in the first place. Catherine entirely agrees with his assessment, but she notices something subtle in Charlotte's demeanor. The young princess is not taking satisfaction in Camilla's absence. In fact, she feels uneasy about the growing void. A pivotal detail unfolds right after one of these missed family teas. Camilla returns briefly to the room after the event has ended and pauses beside the untouched place setting that had been prepared for her. She rests one hand lightly on the back of the chair, looking at the empty table, but she never sits down. That untouched seat no longer looks like a protective boundary. It feels like a surrender. Up until now, Charlotte had refused a single word. She had not rejected Camilla as a person. Once William fully grasps that crucial distinction, he quietly facilitates a step that changes the entire direction of the conflict. There is no king presiding over this moment. No future king steps in to mediate or speak for either side. Catherine waits in another part of the castle, and Charles is deliberately kept absent. For the very first time since the crisis erupted at the Windsor luncheon, Princess Charlotte and Queen Camilla sit down face to face without the heavy machinery of the British monarchy framing the interaction. The 9-year-old princess has not changed her mind about the title that started it all, but what changes instead is far more profound. Both of them finally sit down to explain what they felt had been taken from them. Catherine only helped organize this private sit-down after Charlotte explicitly stated that she wanted to speak with Camilla directly. William agreed to the meeting on one strict condition. No one in the room would use the conversation to demand an apology, pressure the child, or force a new title. Charles issued the exact same directive to Camilla before she walked in, telling her that any real reconciliation had to begin without preconditions. This distinction mattered immensely. A royal title is an official public designation used for state duties, while a family name is rooted purely in private emotion. For the first time, the family actively kept those two worlds separate. Charlotte brings a specific item to the table, the exact photograph of Princess Diana that had been at the heart of the original misunderstanding weeks earlier. She sets the picture down on the table between them. In simple, direct words, she tells Camilla that she believed the Queen wanted her to stop loving someone who was deeply important to her father. The statement is completely devoid of malice, but it hits with absolute clarity. Camilla does not interrupt or defend herself. Instead, she looks at the young princess and admits that the constant presence of Diana touches a deep personal security that she should never have projected onto a child. She explains that hearing Diana discussed so frequently often makes her feel as though she is constantly being measured against a memory she can never live up to. Charlotte looks at her and replies with striking maturity. She states simply that she was never asking Camilla to compete with anyone. That single sentence completely dismantles decades of defensive tension. For years, Camilla had brought adult anxieties and historical baggage into every mention of Diana. But in this quiet room, she finally realizes that the young princess was not engaging in complex palace politics. She was simply asking questions about her own family heritage. Camilla sees with total clarity how much historical weight had been unintentionally forced onto a child who never asked to carry it. Camilla then offers Charlotte a direct unconditional apology. She tells the young princess that she was wrong to suggest that Charlotte could become overly attached to a grandmother she never personally knew. She adds that she was equally wrong to describe those family memories as confusing for the children. Crucially, Camilla does not ask to be called grandmother. That omission changes everything. Charlotte accepts the apology completely, but maintains her firm boundary. She will address her as Camilla in private family settings when appropriate, and use her official royal title during public events. Camilla agrees without hesitation. As Charlotte turns to leave the room, she stops at the doorway. She turns back to face the queen consort and asks a simple question. Will Camilla be attending the upcoming family birthday gathering after all? For the first time, the invitation is personal, rather than an obligation of protocol. Camilla is caught off guard by the gesture, but she immediately smiles and says yes. The two of them had finally established a private peace, but the outside world knew absolutely nothing about the conversation that had just occurred behind closed doors. When Charlotte and Camilla appeared together in public just days later, a single interaction was captured by the media and instantly dissected by millions around the globe. The public did not hear the quiet reconciliation that took place inside Windsor. What they saw was something much smaller, yet vastly more dramatic on screen. Outside Windsor Castle, news cameras caught the moment Princess Charlotte stepped out following a family event. She paused next to Queen Camilla, and instead of offering the warm, familiar embrace that commentators were expecting to see, the 9-year-old princess calmly extended her hand for a formal handshake. Within hours, that footage was broadcasting across global news networks and printed on front pages worldwide. To casual observers and royal pundits, the crisp handshake looked like a sharp public rejection. Inside the family, however, the gesture represented the exact opposite. It was the physical proof of a mutually agreed boundary. William and Catherine knew, before even arriving, that every single movement would be analyzed under a microscope. Rumors of household tension had already begun leaking around Windsor, and photographers were actively waiting for any visual cue that the internal drama was real. This public appearance carried an immense burden. The media was no longer just covering a routine ceremonial walkout. They were watching Princess Charlotte's every move. Yet William and Catherine steadfastly refused to stage fake affection for the cameras. They gave their daughter one single instruction: be respectful and be yourself. Camilla felt the massive narrative shift the second the media headlines began circulating. One major front page featured a large photo of Charlotte extending her hand under the bold headline, "The Royal Distance." Television commentary panels replayed the footage continuously, framing the missing hug as absolute proof that the rift within the royal family had deepened beyond repair. Outside Windsor Castle, crowds gathered to discuss the footage. Some praised the young princess for standing her ground, while others argued that a child should never be positioned at the center of adult historical drama. In a matter of hours, a carefully constructed private boundary had metastasized into a massive national debate. Camilla viewed the headlines and felt deeply humiliated. Charlotte had been entirely polite and composed. The handshake was not a cold punishment. It was the exact middle ground that both of them had agreed upon during their private talk. Yet media interpretation turned that real emotional progress into the appearance of a harsh public snub. King Charles immediately convened a meeting to decide if the palace press office should issue an official statement clarifying what actually happened. Prince William objected instantly and forcefully. He argued that releasing any public statement explaining Charlotte's private feelings would subject his daughter to intense media scrutiny and drag her personal emotions into a public trial. Then, Camilla surprised both the king and the prince. She immediately backed William's position. The queen consort told Charles firmly that Charlotte's personal life should never be used as a public relations tool to repair her own media image, even if staying silent meant allowing the tabloids to run wild with false narratives. That choice marked a massive turning point in the dynamic. For the very first time, Camilla actively protected Charlotte's boundary rather than fighting against it. Later that evening, Charlotte saw the newspaper sitting on the desk beside William and asked her father if she had embarrassed Camilla in front of the world. William looked at his daughter and told her that respectful honesty is never cruelty. He explained that adults must learn to stop expecting children to perform fake emotions just because news cameras are rolling. The media headlines called it a cold rejection, and the palace feared public division. But the true test of this dynamic would take place quietly away from the cameras when Charlotte and Camilla met again in private. In the end, Princess Charlotte never took back the calm sentence that originally stunned the dining room at Windsor Castle. Instead, she demonstrated something far more meaningful, that setting a personal boundary does not mean shutting the door on a real relationship. And Camilla, after weeks of feeling defensive and hurt, accepted a fundamental truth. Genuine belonging can never be manufactured by royal titles, and affection only grows weaker when it is demanded by rank. What began as an explosive table remark ultimately forced 3 distinct generations of the British monarchy to confront the massive difference between ceremonial duty and actual family trust. When the next gathering arrived, Charlotte walked in beside William and Catherine without any special instructions or rehearsed behavior. Charles entered alongside Camilla, and this time, the Queen Consort did not hesitate at the threshold or wonder if she belonged in the room. There were no palace advisors managing the seating arrangements, and no PR teams orchestrating a visible reunion. When private conversation began flowing naturally, Charlotte addressed Camilla by her name, without any awkwardness. Later on, when the setting required formal decorum, she seamlessly used her proper royal title, as dictated by official rank and protocol. The distinction was subtle, but it proved an essential point. True respect does not need to pretend to be forced intimacy. Camilla completely stopped waiting for or demanding the single word that had triggered the entire conflict. Instead, she turned to Charlotte and asked her a thoughtful question about something the young princess had mentioned during their private sit-down weeks earlier. The question caught Charlotte off guard, and she suddenly realized that her words had been remembered and valued. More importantly, she felt genuinely listened to, rather than managed like a public relations risk. King Charles observed the interaction from across the room and finally relaxed. His relief did not stem from his wife securing a personal title he had once hoped she would receive, but from the fact that lingering bitterness no longer dictated the room. William saw it too. For the first time in months, the future king did not look like a father standing guard, ready to shield his daughter from the next emotional blow. Catherine understood what the adults had completely overlooked from the start. Charlotte's initial refusal forced the entire family to address Princess Diana's enduring memory without treating it as a taboo subject or an operational threat. The younger generation was never causing conflict by asking questions about their late grandmother. The older generation was simply projecting their own long-held fears onto those questions. Camilla finally accepted that she did not need to erase or replace Diana's memory in order to build an authentic bond with Charlotte. And Charlotte learned that honoring the grandmother she never met did not require punishing the woman standing directly in front of her. As the final gathering came to a close, Charlotte paused beside Camilla and asked if she would be attending another family event scheduled for the following week. There was no forced hug, no demanded family title, and no grand public declaration. The Queen Consort simply smiled and replied that she would like that very much. And that quiet moment became the true, lasting legacy of Charlotte's refusal. She never called Camilla her grandmother, yet by the end, she no longer needed emotional distance to protect the people she loved. The royal family finally stopped warring over a single word and began building a genuine relationship that could thrive without it. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into the real dynamics shaping the monarchy today. If you enjoyed this detailed story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Prime Royal Central right now so you never miss our next exclusive release. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you in the very next video right here on Prime Royal Central.